Hey guys, Mr. DeCashato here with another Black Ops 2 gameplay and commentary video. So, as you may have guessed from reading the title of the video, we're going to be talking about violence in video games. So if you aren't up to date with the news, and this is somewhat recent news, so I don't blame you, let me just fill you in. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the Newtown, Connecticut Sandy Hook Elementary shooting. So in the shooting, in the investigation afterwards, apparently they found a lot of video game equipment, and I'm sorry for this migrating host screen. They found thousands of dollars of video game equipment and video games in the shooter's house. So that does not look good for video games. So anyway, also after the shooting, Obama assigned a task force led by Joe Biden to promote gun control or control this. It's not exactly clear what their exact objective is, but it is to prevent the same kind of violence that happened at Columbine that happened here, or that happened at Newtown. You know, there's been a ridiculous number of these school shootings, and so I guess this is Obama's answer to them. This task force. So, I mean, what they're going after next. I can't really. I was just thinking. I can't really tell you what they've gone after so far. Obviously, they've talked to the NRA. They've talked to a number of gun lobbyist groups and whatnot. But now they're actually going after the video game industry. And this week in Washington, a bunch of video game representatives met with Joe Biden and the rest of his task force to discuss the role of video games in school shootings and in violence in general. So Joe Biden, obviously, the first thing he criticized was the regulation of violence in video games. He criticized the ESRB ratings. And sorry that I'm doing terribly in this game right now and focusing on talking, or I'm trying my best to. But anyway, so he went after the ESRB ratings and the regulation, and as it turns out, ESRB ratings are enforced very well. It's just that what people like to neglect is that they only apply to who's buying the game. It's completely legal to play the game as if you're under 17. That's a suggested age for gameplay, not for selling in gameplay, but not, it's not necessary for gameplay. It's only necessary for selling. So that's another good point. One of the points that the video representatives made was that it'd be almost impossible without treating video games as if they were weapons themselves to regulate violent video games, aside from what they already have, which is enforced, as I said, very well, the ESRB ratings. I mean, you would have to do background. You would have to check with each person to see if they were stable enough to be playing, violent video games. The regulation, and this is aside from the argument, but the regulation is sort of ridiculous. The next sort of ridiculous part of the argument is where the NRA steps in, and I didn't know this, but the gun industry is one of the biggest critics of the video game industry. They like to point pretty much 100% of the blame for, school shootings and whatnot on the video game industry. They like to, obviously they're they're blamed a lot as well. So this is a quote from the NRA, President LaPierre. He called the video game industry a callous, corrupting shadow industry that sells and sows violence against its own people. Now that is probably the most extreme argument against violent video games I've heard ever, actually, and that's pretty ironic coming from the president of the National Rifle Association. I think they have a much larger role, and I'm not going to talk about my own opinion on gun control, but they have a much larger role in violence, guns do, than video games do. Guns enable people. If video games, and I don't think this is true, but if video games have some sort of influence on people, that is, you can look at that, but you can't put that above, what enables people. That's really ridiculous. Anyway, so personally, I think that what's misunderstood about video games is the nature of the violence within them. People look at, how graphic it is and how accurate it is, the violence, but I think the main thing that you have to look at when talking about, video game violence is what context it's in. And for the most part, the video game industry right now is focused on multiplayer content. I mean, it keeps people playing your game, and if you have good multiplayer content, people are going to want to play your game and buy it, and more, that's what attracts people. A single player experience is no longer as important to selling a video game as it used to be. Now, in a single player experience, I can understand, a regulation for violence, because it's more like watching a really violent movie, in the sense that there's no goal aside from the violence. In multiplayer, it's just sort of, that's the narrative. Whereas in multiplayer, it's not about exactly how the violence... You're not focused on the violence, you're focused on the competition. So I think to most video gamers, there's no difference in competition between a racing game and Call of Duty. It's just competition, and that's all there is to it. I think that's what's mainly misunderstood. People think that the satisfaction you get from video games is from the experiencing a simulated violence, and that's not accurate in the least. I think what people do enjoy about video games is there is this simulated violence, but it's not. I mean, it's not at all. There's nothing to suggest that this is how violence actually is. This is not. There's respawning systems. People come back to life after being killed. It sort of takes away from any idea. There's no profound nature to killing someone who's going to come back in 2 seconds. There's no feeling behind it. It's not desensitizing people to it, and it's not convincing people that people are going to respawn, because it's not reflecting what's happening in real life. It's just not. It's not killing, and that's all it is. And in a sense, it's not even. It's a representation of violence in the real world, but I mean, if the video game industry is really trying to replicate how violence is in the real world, they're doing a really poor job of it, because I don't feel like I'm killing people when I play this game. I don't feel like I'm getting better at killing people, it feels like I'm getting better at pulling triggers at the right time and running around the map at the right time, it's all about strategy, it's not about shooting guns, For the most part, these guns, aren't based on how guns function in the real world. The violence is sort of secondary to competition and strategy and gameplay, if that makes any sense. But anyway, yeah, so I thought that was an interesting little, pretty important part, or thing that happened that's relevant to the video game industry, so I thought I would give that a little bit of a, talk about that a little bit. Anyway, so I'd like to hear what you guys think. I feel like most of you are probably predisposed to my opinion, considering that I don't think there are many that are watching my videos, period. No, I don't think that there are many that are watching my videos who aren't playing video games also. Anyway, so yeah, leave a comment. If you liked what I said, if you liked what I talked about, maybe you could leave me a like as well. If you want to check out my other videos, if you like this one, leave me a subscription, and I'll talk to you guys next video. Enjoy the rest of the gameplay.
Hostile hunter-killer drone inbound. Hostile RCX trained right down. Inbound. Brought the pain. Time to get